This recording is for Pre-Algebra Chapter 1, Lesson 4, and Lesson 4 only. We're going to be talking about integers and absolute value. Alright, so what are integers? Well, first, what are whole numbers? Well, whole numbers are counting numbers or natural numbers, so it would be like 1, oops, let me get a better one there. That would be like 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are what we call natural numbers. You know, things you need when you're counting. And whole numbers are natural numbers and 0. All right? So integers are whole, so these are whole numbers. Those are whole numbers. Integers are whole numbers and their opposites. Well, what are opposites? Opposites are numbers that are the same distance from 0, but on opposite sides of 0. There we go. Opposite sides of 0. So the number 1 and the number -1 are opposites because they are still 1 unit from 0, but on opposite sides of 0. So just, yeah. So positive numbers are always on the right, negative numbers are always on the left. And that's just always the way it is. You got to memorize it, guys. So back to opposites. So 2, the opposite of 2 is -2. The opposite of 3 is -3 because 3 is 3 units from 0 and -3 is also 3 units from 0, but again on the opposite side of 0. Okay. So integers, again, are whole numbers, so 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the opposite of those numbers. Well, Miss DH, you're saying there's no opposite of 0. That's right. So 0 is the only thing that doesn't have an opposite. So, but you do have the opposite of 1, you have the opposite of 2, you have the opposite of 3, because obviously you have -1, -2, -3, -4, and so on. All right, so hope you understand opposites. Okay. Absolute value. Absolute value is the distance a number is from 0. So if we're looking at the absolute value of 1, the absolute value of 1 is 1 because 1 is 1 unit from 0. So if I'm looking at -1, -1 is also 1 unit from 0. So therefore the absolute value, and we'd use absolute value bars to show absolute value. So the absolute value of -1 is 1 because -1 is 1 unit from 0. And the thing is why it's always positive is because this distance is always positive. I don't say, hey, I'm negative feet something. I'm not negative inches. I'm not negative centimeters. I'm not negative miles. I'm just saying I'm 5 miles behind you. So it's not necessarily a negative or positive. It's direction. And because it's direction and distance, your answer for whatever simplifies down in the absolute value bars is going to be a positive number, okay? Unless it's 0, because what is 0's distance from 0? 0. So the absolute value of 0 is 0, okay? There's the absolute value of -5 is 5 because -5 is 5 units from 0, okay? Alrighty, so numbers that are the same distance from 0 but on the opposite side, those are opposites. We already covered that. Alright, let's move on. Okay, so next up we need to talk about performing operations with absolute value bars. So here's an example. We have 14 minus the absolute value of 9 plus 4. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to simplify inside of the absolute value because absolute value are grouping symbols. And grouping symbols, again, are like parentheses, brackets, symbols. There we go. So they're like parentheses and brackets. The only thing is they're like super brackets. They are super parentheses or super grouping symbols because they actually can do math. They make you do something. So be aware of that. You have to treat them like parentheses, but then you also actually have to treat them as absolute value. So they have two powers. They act like grouping symbols and they're going to tell you that you need to take the distance from 0 of whatever ends up being inside. Okay? But inside after you've simplified. Okay, let's move on. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to simplify inside the absolute value. 9 plus 4 is 13. Well, what's the absolute value of 13? The absolute value of 13 is 13. So now I just have 14 minus 13 is 1. There we go. That's it. All right, next problem. We have negative 5 multiplied, because remember, whenever you have a number right next to a grouping symbol, it implies multiplication. Okay, multiply. Okay, but we don't need that right now. Okay, so we're going to simplify inside the absolute value because, again, it's like a grouping symbol, and we're following the order of operations. So 3 plus negative 2 is 1. The absolute value of 1 is 1. Oops, wrong one. Is 1. And negative 5 times 1 is negative 5. So it is possible to have an answer, a final answer to a problem that's negative, even though it has absolute value, because there might be something going on after the absolute value. And in this case, it's a negative 5, multiplying by negative 5 times 1, you're going to get negative 5. All right, almost done. So let's go ahead and talk about how to read things that go on with absolute value and things that have like these extra negative signs, because they're actually a little weird. So how we're going to read number 3 is the opposite of the absolute value of negative 2. So the opposite is what that little extra negative sign is. All right, that little extra negative sign means the opposite of. So if I say, what's the opposite of 2, you're going to say negative 2, because 2 is 2 units from 0, and negative 2 is also 2 units from 0, but on the other side of the 0 on the number line. Okay, so if I'm going to simplify this, I'm going to first obviously do the grouping symbols, which is the order, which is the absolute value. So absolute value of negative 2 is 2, but then I have to apply the negative sign, this right here, the opposite sign. So even though the absolute value of negative 2 is 2, I then need to add the negative sign to get negative 2. Okay, I think that's it, guys. I'm recording this on a Friday, so I hope you all have a good weekend. But if you're listening to this not on Friday, well, still hope you had a good weekend. All right, bye, guys.